While some people argue that detective stories are satisfying because they tap into a deep-seated desire to see bad people punished and good people rewarded, this actually ends up being a very small fraction of many private detective stories. The bad people aren't always punished, but the thrill comes from the reveal of information. The thrill comes from discovering who the bad guy was, how the bad guy did it. And that's why we keep reading or keep watching. So in traditional British mysteries, which are also referred to as cozy mysteries, the setting is usually a small town with a small cast of characters, and the crime is a glaring anomaly, right? It is something completely out of the ordinary that has happened, and it disrupts the life in this cute, quaint, small town. And the detective comes in, identifies the criminal, removes the criminal, and life goes back to normal. With the hard-boiled detective story, and this is one of the reasons why Los Angeles is such a frequent setting for it, the settings are often huge, the cast of characters is huge, this idea that the detective has to travel great distances in order to gather information is very important. But the biggest difference is that in the hard-boiled detective story, the crime is not an anomaly. The crime is actually like this thread that sticks out, and then when you pull on the thread, everything falls apart. The whole sordid nature of the city is revealed. So even though the initial crime might just be like a missing person or a blackmail case, it ends up exposing this whole web of corruption like you see in movies like The Big Sleep in Chinatown. In the decades since Philip Marlowe emerged in The Big Sleep, the LA private eye continues to be this very archetypal character. He investigates crime on big screens and small screens, and yes, he's almost always a he. In a world that seems to lack reason, morality, this figure of the detective with his integrity, with his moral code, is reassuring. You know, he's like the old school cowboy who comes into town to impose order. We respect his integrity, we respect his devotion to the cause. He drives around, rather than on a horse, he drives around in his Ford or his Cadillac, but he's usually isolated, he works alone, he can't be married, he has to always kind of keep people at a distance, and this distance becomes important because it gives him perspective, right? So he doesn't have any emotional attachments. While the tendency of casting the racial or sexual ethnic other as the villain doesn't really allow for a lot of racially diverse private eyes, every once in a while you will get a black private eye, most conspicuously seen with Easy Rawlins in Devil in a Blue Dress. And in that kind of narrative, the otherness actually serves to benefit the narrative because the private eye is really othered. He's really an outsider, and his outsider status is what gives him perspective on the narrative as it unfolds. In contrast to traditional detectives like Hercule Poirot or Sherlock Holmes, who are often seen as less masculine because of their effeminate interests or their sort of intellectual pursuits, the hard-boiled detective is seen as thoroughly masculine. And this is why having a female equivalent either doesn't work or, at the very best, is inherently problematic. And you'll see this in TV shows like Remington Steele or The Catch on ABC. In fact, when the private eye first emerged, there was no female equivalent. You couldn't have a tough-talking, worldly wise woman who could defend herself in rough company. Like, that just didn't exist. There wasn't a precedent for it. Due to their alleged proficiency for gossip and intuition, women seem naturally suited to be amateur detectives. And you'll see this with TV shows like Murder, She Wrote or Agatha Christie's Miss Marple. However, it becomes very problematic if you want to make the woman a professional private eye. As an amateur, there's sort of more room for error. We can credit luck for her success. And we kind of forgive mistakes more easily because, hey, she's an amateur. The amateur is also naturally suited for cleaning up crimes, right? Because she's coming out of the domestic sphere. As inherently problematic as the female private eye can be, it's important to note that there's one specific manifestation of the female private eye that is at least marginally acceptable, and that's the child sleuth. And we really see this with Nancy Drew. So with the female private eye is adding these feminine characteristics, but she's also complicating or threatening the traditional hero-victim binary. She's threatening to the patriarchy either as a femme fatale or as a successful private eye. But the child sleuth is able to incorporate these elements but not threaten the patriarchy. And so therefore she becomes less threatening, and it's possible for her to solve her crimes successfully, and everyone's happy.